Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Monday, the 19th of January. I'm Stephen Carroll in London. Coming up today, a transatlantic power play. US President Donald Trump shakes the foundations of America's closest alliances with the threat of fresh tariffs over Greenland. EU leaders plan a meeting to discuss their response as Deutsche Bank warns Europe may weaponise its US assets. Plus, why a soak the rich battle over wealth taxes is gaining traction across the world. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. European leaders have reacted with outrage to President Trump's threat to impose tariffs on countries that oppose his desire to own Greenland. On Saturday, the US president announced a 10% levy due to take effect next month and rising to 25% by June on 8 European countries, including the UK, France, Germany and Denmark. The move came after they committed to holding token NATO military drills in Greenland in a bid to show the continent's commitment to Arctic security. But US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says Europe is too weak to ensure the Arctic territory's security.
If there were an attack on Greenland from Russia, from some other area, we would get dragged in. So better now, peace through strength, make it part of the United States, and there will not be a conflict because the United States right now, we are the hottest country in the world. We are the strongest country in the world. The Europeans project weakness. The U.S. projects strength.
Scott Bessent's comments on NBC's Meet the Press came as European leaders forcefully pushed back. The UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer blasted the tariff threat as completely wrong. France's President Emmanuel Macron called it unacceptable, and Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson said his country wouldn't be blackmailed. EU leaders are now set to hold an emergency meeting in the coming days to discuss possible retaliation to Trump's latest tariff threat. Member states are discussing several options, including retaliatory levies on more than $100 billion of US goods. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron says the bloc should consider using its most powerful retaliatory tool, the anti-coercion instrument. That would allow the EU to impose additional tariffs, new taxes on tech companies, or targeted curbs on investment in the bloc. Speaking on Sunday, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni sought to cool tensions between the world's biggest trading partners and said she'd spoken to President Trump.
I think it is necessary instead to resume the dialogue on this to avoid an escalation from this point of view, and that is what I am working on. I spoke with Donald Trump a few hours ago, to whom I said what I think, and I spoke to the Secretary General of NATO, who confirms to me that NATO is starting to work from this point of view.
Despite Giorgia Meloni's efforts, Trump's plan to impose tariffs over Greenland calls into question the validity of the trade deal agreed last year between the EU and the US. That deal has already been partially implemented but still needs a nod from the European Parliament, which is now likely to halt approval. The geopolitics could risk a major market fallout, according to Deutsche Bank. Their global head of FX research, George Sarvalos, notes that Europe is America's largest lender, with its countries owning $8 trillion of US bonds and equities. Security expert Troy Bouffard says the US president is missing the potential consequences.
I think all of these signals, the rhetoric, the sort of hostile takeover articulations and behavior is all part of this. He doesn't factor in the damage to relationships, isolation of the United States, and losing allies. It's a zero-sum game for him with not much appreciation for international relations and foreign affairs.
College of Business and Security Management Assistant Professor Troy Bouffard speaking there. US and European stock futures are both falling on the news as traders turn to haven assets like gold. The annual gathering of the world's business elite in Davos is set to showcase the changing global economic order. This year's World Economic Forum is set to be totally dominated by Donald Trump's attendance, as well as the rising star of AI. Bloomberg's James Woolcock has more.
The Davos Summit's theme this year is a spirit of cooperation. The irony was noted by former UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who told Bloomberg the old order is gone. He added, "These are the most dangerous times in living memory, but also the most transformative." You can see that change reflected in the World Economic Forum's agenda. In place of conversations about climate change and diversity, expect the gathering to now focus on AI, deal-making, and above all, the presence of President Trump. In London, James Woolcock, Bloomberg Radio.
China's economy lost more momentum last quarter despite meeting the government's 5% growth target. The world's second largest economy expanded by 4.5% last quarter compared to a year earlier. That's the slowest pace since the post-COVID reopening in late 2022. Raymond Young, Chief Greater China economist at ANZ, says there's an underlying weakness in the economy.
My worry is not about the headline number, it's about the distribution. Because now, if you look at the unemployment number too, especially the youth unemployment, I expect to be a second-digit number still. I don't have the number for December, but the November number is 16.9%. It's higher than the November number last year, or 2024.
ANZ's Raymond Young speaking there. He went on to note that the country's GDP figures were encouraging. For the full year, the economy grew by 5%, according to data released by the National Bureau of Statistics. That's matching 2024's pace of expansion. Meanwhile, China's consumer spending and business investment remains sluggish as a weak jobs market and falling home prices weigh on domestic demand. In Spain, at least 21 people have been killed and dozens more injured in a high-speed rail incident. A train travelling from Malaga to Madrid derailed and hit another oncoming train in the province of Cordoba on Sunday evening. Here is Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez speaking through an interpreter.
Tonight is a night of profound grief for our country. I would like to express my deepest condolences to the families and loved ones of the victims. No words can alleviate such great suffering, but I want you to know that the entire country stands with you during this difficult time.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez there speaking through an interpreter. Spain's transport minister said the cause of the crash was unknown and more victims could still be confirmed. And those are our top stories on the markets. European stock futures sharply lower, down 1.2% for Euro Stoxx 50 futures this morning. Looking at gold prices, up by 1.7%, $4,668 a troy ounce. Silver is also up by 3.4% as well. On Wall Street now, US markets are closed for a holiday, but futures are still lower for equities, down 1.1% for Nasdaq futures this morning. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is down by 0.2%. In a moment, more on how Trump's latest moves on Greenland are hanging over the World Economic Forum in Davos. Plus, are wealth taxes the answer to Western governments' fiscal woes? But another story that we've been reading this morning, and the debate now raging in Europe over whether or not to unpack the EU's biggest trade weapon, given the threat of fresh tariffs over Greenland. Bloomberg opinion columnist Lionel Laurent has been writing about this, and he says that European leaders must be ready to play hardball if these levies materialise. Now, he says that could include using the so-called anti-coercion instrument. It's a tool that's designed to protect the EU when it's put under tariff pressure by foreign powers. France's Emmanuel Macron among those already talking about using this. How much support can it have among European leaders? They need to have a qualified majority to be able to use this instrument. Lionel writes, this rapidly approaching decision point, and that Europe's mice must find their inner tigers. In response to Donald Trump's latest action, you can read his piece at bloomberg.com/opinion. Well, let's bring you more now on that dilemma facing European leaders. This, as many of them will be travelling along with the US President to Davos for the World Economic Forum. They're also now planning an emergency summit to discuss the latest tariff threats. Our Europe Executive Editor, Chad Thomas, joins us now from Davos for more. Chad, good morning. What sort of response should we expect from EU leaders to these tariff threats? Will there be the support that's needed for this anti-coercion instrument?
Well, good morning, Stephen, from Davos. I think we'll be watching very closely the meetings that are taking place this week between EU leaders and looking into this matter. I think it's hard to say how they're going to come down on this. So far, there has been a lot of talk. There have been a lot of sharp words, but no decisions have been made. The EU has tried very hard over the last year to try and turn down the heat. They've tried to
reach a deal with Donald Trump and then hopefully move forward when it comes to trade and security and all sorts of other matters. On the anti-coercion instrument, it's interesting because France, Emmanuel Macron, he has been the one who's really been very vocal about this in the last couple of days. He, of course, has been the one who's been pushing for the use of it all along. Whether they can get that qualified majority to move forward with it is remains really to be seen. As we heard from Meloni just a little while ago, she says she's trying to turn down the heat. There are a lot of countries who don't want to go this route because of the significant trade, of course, they have with the U.S.
Now, many countries in Europe will, of course, remember the long run-up to the agreement that came last summer as well, and the ramping up of threats on both sides that we had seen as well. Does these latest developments show that EU strategy of trying to appease Donald Trump has failed? Can that still be salvaged?
Well, certainly what EU leaders have learned, Stephen, is that when you reach a deal, it doesn't mean that the deal is done. That deal with Donald Trump is only a deal for the moment. And so this appeasement that they have done, what some people would call appeasement with the U.S., hasn't led to them reaching a deal that then allowed them to move forward in all of these different areas. With Donald Trump, every single issue that's important to him, everything is on the table again. And we've been speaking in the last couple of days to dozens of people across the EU who have been privately acknowledging to us that the tactics that they've been using with the U.S. have not been working.
Could Davos be a forum where perhaps some sort of compromise could be brokered? Now, the official theme is a spirit of cooperation, which seems particularly pointed given the backdrop. Is it a moment where maybe we may see these leaders come together and provide a de-escalation to these tensions?
Well, in Davos, there certainly have been, over the years, having been coming here for more than a decade, moments where things have happened that were a big surprise. People who bump into one another in the hallways and have a conversation that leads to change of some sort. We have 6 of the 7 G7 leaders attending, many leaders from the EU, of course, Donald Trump coming with a huge delegation from the U.S. So there's certainly that possibility, and it's something that everyone is looking out for. Everyone expects there to be significant discussions around the Greenland topic, around Ukraine. Will President Trump meet with the Danish Prime Minister? These are all things we'll be watching very closely. And when people get together in person in a forum like this, there is that chance that, as they say, a spirit of cooperation, some people would sort of wink at that there could be some sort of deal reached.
Okay, Chad Thomas, our Europe Executive Editor, thank you very much for joining us. And of course, full coverage of Davos across Bloomberg's platforms all this week. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this. Now, across the Western world, governments are turning toward a familiar source of funds to address their fiscal challenges: the wealthy. They're increasing existing wealth taxes, planning new ones, and considering exit taxes for those who move. Bloomberg's Charlie Wells has been writing about this, and he joins us now for more. Charlie, how widespread is this trend? What are the common approaches being taken to taxing the rich?
Yeah, Stephen, so this is a policy trend that's kind of taking off on both sides of the Atlantic. And it's really interesting because it kind of brings up this old idea of a, quote, net wealth tax. So basically, governments kind of have about 3 general ways that they can tax people, right? They can tax their income, they can tax consumption, or they can tax their wealth. And over the past couple of decades, what we really have seen is kind of a breaking point that we've reached on income, right? We've seen income taxes increase in a number of countries. Consumption, we have seen consumers really struggle with kind of the price of goods, difficult there. And so what a number of policy makers are saying is, you know what, we've got to start looking at wealth, the value of stuff that people own. So you hear this in France, you've heard this in the UK from, a number of policy makers, a number of political parties, and you're starting to hear this in the US in places like California. And so this is really kind of a shift, because we really have been focusing on income tax over over the past century, really. And now you're starting to hear this pick up in a lot of countries in this moment when there's a lot of fiscal pressure.
And are wealth taxes a good way to raise tax revenue? Are they a good solution to that fiscal pressure?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we've really been getting at over the past few months as these proposals have started to come up from different pockets in different countries. And I think when you look to the past, there actually have been wealth taxes, these net wealth taxes, where you take the value of everything someone owns and then put a charge on that annually. They actually have not been that successful over the past, couple decades. In Europe, back in the 1990s, there were about a dozen countries that had these wealth taxes, but they have generally been phased out because they weren't so effective. But these are coming back. It's a trendy policy and it stirs up emotion. And that's something that kind of comes on both sides and why we need a lot of nuance here, because it can sound really attractive to kind of target the wealth of incredibly rich people. Really rich people can feel targeted. But, having reported the story, having talked to many tax professionals in many different countries, really what I got is these aren't super effective. There are a lot of trade-offs. They can raise money, but you've really got to simplify in order to make things work.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.